Hello students, welcome back to Accounting 1329, Payroll and Business Tax Accounting. This is Dr. Mercado speaking, and in this lecture we are going to be continuing covering the content from Chapter 2. Please remember to read the chapter before you attempt any of your problems, to review your PowerPoints, your lectures. Your past homework from last week is now available, so you can go back and review your homework assignments. So in this particular lecture, I am going to tackle problem 2.5. Okay, problem 2.5 deals with tips. Okay, it says Gabrielle Pavin, a waitress at the Hole in the Wall restaurant, worked 42 hours this week and collected over $500 in tips. The restaurant uses the full tip credit against the minimum wage and pays Pavin the minimum required for tipped employees. We have to determine her gross pay from the restaurant. Okay. Now, if you refer to your textbook, section 2.1J, it deals with tips. Okay. There's about 2 pages of information on tips. Please make sure that you go back and review all of that section. Now, in that section, we are informed that the minimum wage for tipped employees is $2.13 per hour. Now, if the employee does not make enough in tips to bring that up to the minimum wage, which is $7.25, the employer is responsible to pocket out the difference. Okay? If the employee makes more than that, then all the employer has to pay is that $2.13. Now, in this particular case, we see here that the employee made $500 in tips. So let's say for a 40-hour work week times $7.25, which is the minimum wage, that is what an employee would be taking home, $290. This employee is taking home $500. So that means that the employee made a lot more than just minimum wage, okay? Now, regardless of how much money the employee makes in tips, the employer is still responsible to pay for the 40-hour work week as well as for overtime hours worked. This employee worked 2 hours overtime. Okay, so first let's calculate the pay for the 40 hours. Okay, so we have 40 hours that the employee worked, and the minimum wage for tipped employees is $2.13. Okay, let's see what that gives us. 40 hours times 213, that gives me $85.20. Okay, so on top of the $500 in tips that they made, they're going to get paid $85.20 for the regular wages of $2.13 per hour because this is a tipped employee. Okay, now we have to calculate the overtime pay. Okay, now before we calculate the overtime pay for those 2 hours, we have to do a series of steps to calculate the overtime rate. Okay, I'm going to break it down into 3 steps. Step number 1 is to calculate the overtime rate based on the minimum wage. Okay, so that's the minimum wage is $7.25, and we're going to multiply by 1.5 because it's time and a half. That means $7.25 times 1.5. That means that the overtime rate is $10.88. And it's 88 cents because that third digit is a 5, so we're going to round up 1. Okay? Okay. Now, step number 2 is determining the credit that we're going to give to this employer because the employee made way more than the minimum wage required. Okay? So, we know that the minimum wage is $7.25. I'm going to subtract that from my minimum wage for being a tipped employee, which is $2.13. So that's going to give me $7.25 minus $2.13. That's going to give me a credit of $5.12. Okay. So this basically is going to be adjusted towards the overtime rate calculation. The employer is not going to pay the full amount of overtime. It's going to pay an adjusted amount because the wage for tipped employees is lower. Okay. Now, once we have those two, we're going to do step number 3, which is we're going to get the 1088, which we calculated. 1088 is the regular overtime rate for regular employees. We're going to subtract it from the 512, which we calculated in step 2, that is the amount that is over the minimum tipped wages. Okay. And then that will give me my overtime rate for this particular tipped employee. So it's 1088 minus the 512. So that means that my overtime rate for this tipped employee is going to be $5.76. Okay. So for every hour worked overtime, the employee is going to make $5.76. Okay. So how many hours did the employee work overtime? The employee worked 2 hours above the 40, and we're going to use the overtime rate of $5.76. And then that will be 2 times 576. That will be $11.52. Okay. So the employee is going to make $11.52 on overtime, $85.20 on the regular pay for the 40 hours, plus the $500 in tips. Okay. So just think, when you are calculating payroll, oh, the employee made $1,000, we don't have to worry about it because they made way above the minimum wage. Yeah, that's awesome, but you still have to pay them for those 40 hours at $2.13. And if they worked extra, anything above 40, you have to pay them overtime. So you need to figure out the overtime rate as well. Okay? So that is basically it for exercise 2.5. I will have more problems, so please stay tuned and make sure that you listen to these upcoming videos. And please make sure that if you do not score a 70% or better on your first attempt, you utilize the second attempt in your homework or your quizzes to try to improve your overall standing. Okay? If you're not getting it, practice makes perfect. The more you practice, the better. Okay? So that is it. Until next time, have a wonderful rest of your day.